2030. I mean, I don't even know what I'm going to have for my dinner tonight, let alone what I'm going to be doing in 10 years' time. But I was quite taken when the slide came up at the beginning, saying as many as almost 40% of people hadn't been at an ETAG conference before. Because many people in this room today will have actually been involved in the compilation of the 2020 strategy, and in all honesty, like we say on a daily basis, you just can't believe how quickly the years go. And I was at a seminar yesterday that was organised by the St James's Centre Development. And it was incredible thinking that, I know many of us work in marketing, but you look and just go, what a wonderful marketing proposition the City of Edinburgh is. And when I look at the last 10 years and you look at how exciting it's going to be with the opening of that new St James development, the announcement of Diageo with the Johnny Walker experience on the other side of Princess Street, we're an absolutely and utterly vibrant city. So it's kind of disappointing that you feel at the moment that when you pick up a local newspaper, that tourism itself appears to be in the back foot. We spend more time talking about being overcrowded than we actually do about championing what we actually have. And many of you, I know many people in this room, many people travel abroad, and you travel around, whether it's around Britain or the rest of the world. How many times do you go anywhere and you don't hear anything positive about Edinburgh? It's either a fantastic city, I've been there, I recommend it, I can't wait to go back, it's on my list. So therefore, right at the very centre of what we've got is something that's fantastic. And I think we really need to remind ourselves about that. So at the very centrepiece of any kind of important things like that is a strategy. And a lot of work was done, beginning in 2012 at the time, to produce a 2020 tourism strategy. So now is the time to sit down and do the next one. So this is the beginning of our journey to do that. We're here to talk a little bit, first of all, with Peter here to my right, to talk about phase one. And phase one was about gathering the information that is going to enable us to take on the next few phases. And what is important today to stress is everyone here will be part of that process. This initial information, this research work that's been done will be that phase one. Phase two will be a consultative exercise with all the people in the industry, feeding in their views in terms of what we're going forward. Then all of that will then be combined, drawing together a draft strategy document that will then go out, be tested in the industry, and the idea being that at this very conference next year, that strategy will be launched. So it's important to just say that all we are doing today is beginning to tell you about that. And there's some interesting information that Peter will be talking you through today. A couple of things at the beginning to point out, though. This isn't, while it was saying ETAG, you're talking about ETAG at the conference today, this is a city strategy. It's not Scottish Enterprises strategy, it's not ETAG's strategy, it's the city strategy, it's your strategy. And we are approaching that, I think, the same way that we've done in an organisation like ETAG. It's very much a team Edinburgh approach. So when a strategy document is produced and when the information comes, what we don't want is we do not want people to be sitting in this room or wider saying, I didn't hear about it, I didn't have any say in it, I wasn't consulted about it, because that's exactly what you're going to be. So what is really important is we get people's views. When you're invited to these sessions, you really need to make sure that you find the time to come along. Because if we do, we will have a strategy document which we can all buy into. If we don't, we will have a disparate mass, and we will end up, obviously, again, having to do this thing on the back foot. So I think it's important that we use this information and this strategy as a way going forward, because at a time where money is going to be tight, there'll be conflicting requirements for money, we need to use that document as a clarion call for investment. Some of the stats you've heard already today, a lot of 1 in 3 new jobs being created through tourism, information on the campaign on market in Edinburgh, £99 being raised as a result of a £1 investment. Tourism is a brilliant story and it's very successful. So what I will do just now, we will hand over to Peter. He will talk through some of the evidential stuff that we've done. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions for us to take it forward. Okay, thank you, Peter.
Perfect, thank you very much, Nick. We have a couple of questions, don't we, to kick off?
We do.
So I thought we'd kick off just with a couple of quick questions. We're going to go through these quite quickly. Very interested to see your opinion on this. 461%, that's quite a lot. Which one would you say was responsible for that growth in that 5-year period? Okay, well, let's find out the answer. It was Belgium.
Now, that's quite interesting because I know that people have obviously questioned the style and taste of the Belgians. I think a country whose 2 most famous figures are Hercule Poirot and Tintin, both of whom are made up. So it's good to see that the Belgians are coming along. I'm sure that's quite a surprise to everybody here.
Okie dokie, and the next one? Okay, interesting. Interesting that the top one seems to be quite well known. It was international students. Okay, let's find out the answer. It's actually all of them.
Aren't we clever?
Yeah, there's a lot to be proud of. In that case, definitely. Okay, thank you. Now, we have got a few questions at the end of my presentation. Interesting to see what your opinions are, and this is also quite a useful process, quite a useful opportunity since we have so many people in the room here with a lot of experience to give their feedback. But actually, no, just before we move on, I'm interested to know this one. Thinking about technology. We're just thinking about what do you think will make a difference in behaviour, not necessarily which will happen or which will be the biggest, but which do you think will affect visitor behaviour the most over the coming years? See if we've got a crystal ball out. Okay. Well, there's a clear shift there in online booking, and those of you who remember, if you remember my presentation from last year, I was here talking about the collaborative economy, a report that we'd done on the impact of the collaborative economy on the tourism sector in Scotland. Of course, it's something that's based almost entirely online. If you're not online, you're not present, and this is something which is putting a huge amount of small suppliers, they're competing directly with the traditional tourism industry in that sense. Okay, well, thank you for sharing your opinions on that. You can put your phones down now. Let me just, so yeah, as Nick was explaining, and as we've heard from Bernard's brilliant presentation there, the world is definitely not standing still. And our job here is to sort of move from looking at the global and the national context to start asking some of these serious questions of what on earth does this mean for Edinburgh in the coming years. And as we've discovered, there's a lot of different perspectives. There's no right or wrong answers, but our job there is to set some of the questions. The strategy is definitely not written yet. Our job is to be, a bit like Bernard said, to be provocative, to be creative, to be very open-minded, and to be also very realistic about some of the situations that we have at the moment, and ask ourselves some serious questions about what will be coming up in the future. Before I go on, those of you who don't know us, I'm going to go very quickly and just say we work a lot in strategy and research in the tourism industry, and we do it very widely in Europe. Those of you who know European Cities Marketing, of which Marketing Edinburgh is a member, this is an organisation, actually, in 2 weeks' time, people from around Europe will be coming to, for a conference in Edinburgh, the European Cities Marketing Conference. We've done a couple of their major reports, working with members, listening to them and putting into plain English what they say. Talking about the future of destination marketing, well, that's quite a how do I say, there's a big question mark over that, and there's an industry going through quite a lot of soul searching at the moment. But a couple of years ago, we set out a collective ambition, a collective idea for how that would look. And then perhaps giving some of the more pressing concerns and situations that are happening around Europe, we've done this toolbox on tourism growth, which is both of which are available online. This report last year, which I just mentioned about the collaborative economy, working in the Netherlands, tourism distribution in the Netherlands is not just about how do we spread visitors out from Amsterdam, it's also about looking for new markets and new opportunities and activating tourism in places where it's not really happening very much. So we're working with a network there. A bit closer to home, we've been working in Aberdeenshire on their tourism strategy, quite an interesting place with a lot going on there as well, huge amount of hotel supply and opportunities there. And finally, very exciting, this was the Royals helped put this on the map the other day. Of course, there's a lot going on, not just in Dundee, but the whole Tay Cities region, so we're working on that strategy as well. And it could be interesting to talk about synergies there between Edinburgh and Dundee in the future. Anyway, so let me just tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing over the past few months. We didn't really get a lot of time over Christmas. I was working solidly throughout the last 3 months. I had about half an hour for a turkey sandwich on Christmas Day because we have been working on a deep analysis and interpretation of evidence about Edinburgh. As Nick said, this is only phase 1. There are 3 phases to the 2030 strategy, and the idea is that learning lessons from the past, this is a process which is now going to be much longer, giving Edinburgh's ETAG and the other partner organisations in this wanted to take plenty of time to think carefully, to collect a huge range of opinions and evidence about what's happening in the city in order to make a strategy that's realistic and will actually work well for the future. The current strategy has been working very well, actually, and as we heard earlier this morning, in many respects, many targets have been hit already years ahead of their growth. The city has been attracting a lot of visitors and a lot of spend. But then, of course, that is also raising questions about the future as well. And it's also important to be realistic and to be, let's just say, confront reality and talk about that as well, to be brave enough to talk about this situation as an industry and not just sort of tell each other what we want to hear. So this is what we did. It is the most comprehensive analysis that's ever really been done about tourism in the city. It's a very, very wide-ranging look. Strategies often tend to look about, okay, what happened with visitor behaviour in the past? What do we think will happen in the future? What would we like to happen? And we're home and dry. But this is different. This is slightly different because we wanted to gather a much wider range of evidence, looking at all sorts of different sources, and I'll just tell you about that in a second. But we really wanted to get the full picture on not just tourism in Edinburgh, but Edinburgh in general and the wider region as well, to understand what is really going on in the city, what sort of developments will affect tourism, where could there be opportunities and where could there be challenges in the future. And as I said, the aim here is to be slightly provocative. It's not to tell people what they want to hear, necessarily. It's there to ask some of these big questions and to spark a bit of a debate for the coming months. Now, I don't know if any of you, how often you read the material that comes out of the City of Edinburgh Council. There's a lot of documents there, and there's a lot of quite heavy policy documents as well. They can sometimes take a while to digest. That's why we didn't get much time off for Christmas. But I have to say, this is a huge amount of evidence was gathered, not just from the council, but actually from a huge range of sources. We looked at what's coming from European Cities Marketing. We looked at other destinations around Scotland. We looked at the ONS for the UK as well, but also other big sources like Skift as well and online resources to sort of build up a picture from all sorts of different angles, not just about Edinburgh, but the national and the international context as well. What are some of the areas then we looked at? When I say we look at the city from all angles, what does that really mean? Well, some of the big tourism themes then, obviously the issue of destination management, perhaps not so much marketing, but management, how you manage the city in the future. Issues like productivity in general, how productive is the tourism sector based on the investment that goes in. Then things like street cleaning and opening hours as well. and the very important City Vision project that's going on at the moment. Also other things like the available land, the environment, and hotel developments, and we're going to be hearing a bit more about those in depth later on, as well as more general things like technology as well, and the shift in consumer values that's occurring, some of which we've heard already this morning. How do we shape all of that really disparate information? How on earth do we try and put it all into one? Well, this is the process we used. We sort of take we took a gradually narrower focus. We looked at the international level. We looked at the state of the global economy and how that's shaping up at the moment. We looked at the UK context in general, and obviously then we narrowed our focus to talking about the city of Edinburgh, and then we focused on the tourism issues in particular. Looking then at things like tourism demand, we asked some questions about tourism governance, and so ETAG and Marketing Edinburgh and sort of the roles that they currently have, and asking whether those roles completely cover the needs that the city has now and the needs that the city may have in the future. And this will result then in a bit of an analysis and then some lessons learned for the next phase of the strategy, which is coming up. So I guess you're curious to know what we found. It's quite a long document, there's a lot there. It's going to be completely public and fully available for everybody to download and look through. There's going to be a fully readable report. It's well written and put into plain English, and as well as an executive summary for those who are a bit more pressed for time. So unfortunately I can't cover the whole lot, but I wanted to share a couple of interesting lessons that we found. Well, surprise, surprise, as Bernard explained very well this morning, Edinburgh doesn't exist in a bubble. That's very clear. If we look at some of the major global issues and some of the issues that are affecting the UK in particular at the moment, we've heard about that temperature change. We often think that climate change is something that affects developing countries the most and most severely. Well, yes, but of course, when it shuts the airport for a couple of days, or it's affecting even the change in the weather is affecting people deciding to stay at home perhaps or not take their foreign vacation. That has a big effect as well. Urbanisation, it's something that's happening everywhere around the world, including in Edinburgh. The population is due to increase by, I think, around another 100,000 over the next 20 years. And that's important. That's going to have its own effect. This is all going to happen regardless or not of whether visitors come, but it's something that we absolutely have to take into account. Consumer values, we heard a little bit about nostalgia and things. We're very much aware of the rise of populism around the world, and to some extent, in some ways, this is going to have its effect on the decisions that are made. And there we go. Well, yes, national issues become local ones. Now, in this case, I'm not necessarily talking about there's a couple of different things here, actually. Brexit, like many people, I've been trying to find a sort of appropriate symbol or icon for Brexit. I know the people struggle with this on the news. They struggle with this on the news every single day, and the people that make those Shutterstock images of the European flag and the British one and stuff, they're struggling to find new symbols, I think. But that's the one I chose. I say issues. Well, there's a lot going on, and this is, let's say, looking at a UK level, but much of this applies definitely to Scotland in general. The UK inbound growth, that's an issue. It's generally seen as a good thing, definitely. But also issues like transport and connectivity. And when we talk about the final mile, helping visitors once they've travelled, encouraging that 50% of visitors to Britain that go to London to even coax them out of London for a little bit longer. I mean, I remember a famous statistic about the Korean market. 70% of Koreans who visit the UK only go to London, and then they disappear off elsewhere. And in general, only 8% of the visitors to the UK come to Scotland. Many of them come to Edinburgh too, but it starts to raise some questions about, obviously we know international tourism growth has increased in Edinburgh, but actually it's a relatively small percentage still that even come to Scotland in general. Then there's these are some of the more pervasive issues as well, things like labour market and skills. When I talk about unbalanced demand, well, there's the unbalanced demand of folks that only go to London and then they go off to another country. But also, if you look at a Scotland context, 42% of overnight stays by international visitors to Scotland are spent in Edinburgh, and then they don't go anywhere else necessarily. So there's important questions there about how much there's an opportunity there to spread tourism more generally around Scotland. But let's look at that demand then. Just a quick idea. The statistics are out there. There's the performance monitoring report from ETAG, which is very good, very readable. Visits have increased, but spending has increased. This is by the UK market. This is since over the 5-year period to 2017. And interestingly, there's been a huge renewed focus on business travel. So that's increased by 33%. That's really quite significant. But how about when we compare that to the international market? Well, almost 60% of visitors to Edinburgh are from the UK. That can be Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. And so that's accounted for 2.51 million. But there's been an increase there since 2010. There's been a huge increase, 34% increase in international visitors. I think that's something we're all pretty aware of in the 5-year period to 2017. And visitor spend, most of all, and this is based on 2010 prices as well, has increased hugely as well, 46%. So it's undoubtedly good news. Another important indicator when we're considering about how the city's going at the moment is seasonality. The thing is, tourism has increased in the winter, but it's also increased in the spring and summer as well. So actually, they sort of still cancel each other out, let's say. And there's still more work to be done in activating growth during the low season as well. It's quite a fiddly graph, I'm aware of this, but if we look at overnight stays among the key markets, the 5 top markets, the pink beds are talking about 2014, the purple beds are 2017, so we can see how this has changed. And in some markets, Italy has shot up, the Italian market's grown, the Spanish one has declined, but look at that 106% growth there in the period 2014 to 17 among the Chinese market. You can see how they sort of balance out in proportion there. And I talked about the percentage of visitors coming to Edinburgh compared to the rest of Scotland, or sort of the overnight stays, the proportion of overnight stays spent in Edinburgh versus the rest of the country. You can see here how that has emerged over time. It's quite a significant proportion of international overnight visits are only spent in Edinburgh and not elsewhere. And that is an important thing to consider when we sort of think about how Edinburgh is the shop window for the rest of the country. What happens if the food and drink, we talk about authentic food and drink, what happens if that's only in Edinburgh? Maybe that's our only chance to really put this across to visitors and help them understand what Scotland has to offer. Of course, on the whole, international spending has grown quite significantly too. Take a very quick look at supply. Now, we talk about growth, and I'm aware, and we get into this subject, I'm aware that at certain times, in certain places in Edinburgh, things can get quite hectic, and there's quite a lot of visitors in one place at one time. So if this is the case, let's look at the airport. This is the most basic graph. It didn't look like that when I made it. It's about the most it looks like a 5-year-old splitting it. It didn't look like that when it was created. Just to give you a quick idea, the airport is 14.3 million million passengers last year. That is expected to almost double in the next period to 2030. There's even a projection up to 2050. And there's a lot of growth. There's been a lot of development at the airport. Also the airport's own passenger arrivals are already ahead of what their prediction was just a couple of years ago. How about hotels? And we're going to hear a bit more about this in the second half this morning. Well, this was an analysis taken in December. This is talking about hotels only, not including hostels and guest houses and student residences as well. This is the current supply, and if we add those with consent, planning consent, and those where planning consent is pending, there's something like a 36% rise if all of these were built. So yeah, as I say, we can add to that figure the hostels, the B&Bs, the self-catering. I put there a question mark about short-term lets. So the last most recent accurate figure that I've seen about Airbnb listings, and that's Airbnb alone, there are other platforms too, that's 9,600, but that was in 2017. So that's increased, but we did ask, but we didn't get any recent data there. So there's a bit of a gap that we've identified and where we need to find out more about this particular subject. And we have to recognize that this does have, depending on where you're building hotels and what's happening, this does have its impact on businesses and communities. Local people increasingly are more sensitive to what's going on in their local area. There is a feeling, and this is not just in Edinburgh, but in other major cities too, people start to often feel less and less certain about what's happening in their neighbourhood, and a little bit like it's not so much within their control. And so people can start to oppose this and feel uncomfortable about it. And that's something we have to understand and we have to confront as well. So building hotels does have an impact on the local community as well. And if we look at attractions, well, traffic is up there too, at the paid ones, the paid visitor attractions and the free ones. And so this was just in that couple of year period, 2016 to 17, and the 2018 figures will be out soon as well. How about the festival attendance? From this wonderful graph, as you can see, 2017 figures, all of these, every festival, whether it's the Fringe, the International Festival, the tattoo stays constant, but for example, even the Book Festival as well, and the International Festival, they all have their space, they all have their parameters, but all have seen an increase. The tattoo stays a constant, as I said, 210,000 visitors each year, but the Fringe has expanded enormously, and there is a question about space and where those go as well. So what does this mean then when we look about, we looked into the issue of space and demand, and not so much about overcrowding per se, but also some of the more general issues that seem to be coming up. Some of what the council's been talking about the media as well, and also just understanding, looking at the Edinburgh People Survey, which is a very useful resource. People generally feel proud and happy to live in this city, and fortunately that has generally been maintained, it's continued. But there are issues around what we call the pedestrian experience. Things about uneven paths, clutter in the streets, tripping over things as well. When you have a lot of people in the streets, as we've seen, I live in Amsterdam, and it's a city which, as we know, is trying to find solutions to the situation of having more people in the streets. Not just international visitors, but local people too, from the city and those from the rest of the Netherlands. And there's this issue about actually taking things away from the street, making it easier to walk around and navigate as well, keeping just people moving more easily. And then, of course, there are other issues as well. There is a heritage management plan regarding the absolutely unique heritage that Edinburgh has. And there are many points raised there about how this could be better done too. So, what are those things? Some of the questions then, what about what's important to local residents? I think, again, this is a very high-level summary of what we've done here. But rather than leap straight into what people in the city centre think about tourism, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this document. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's the Locality Improvement Plan for North East Edinburgh. That includes, actually happens to be out of the 4 locality improvement areas, for the 4 areas that the city's been divided into. This is actually the poorest. And so I thought it would be interesting because while it suffers from some of the greatest deprivation that the city has, it also includes Portobello and Leith, which are 2 areas which are becoming more popular with visitors and are going to see more development in the future. And I thought it would be interesting to know what's important to the people in that area. And this is what they said. And actually, I have to say, the way that this public consultation was done was not a sort of survey that was released at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday when nobody was watching. They went up to people in the street. They actually spent a lot of time talking to people. They went into some of the corners of different community groups that often don't get very represented or don't turn up to public meetings, and they asked people. And these were the responses that they were given. Now, we could ask, what's the tourism industry got to do with this? Well, my point here is that this is something we need to start actually thinking about more and more ourselves. We need to actually start answering some of these questions because more and more questions are being asked about the tourism industry. So there is this responsibility there to start engaging with some of these issues. And many of the facilities and many of the improvements that we could see around the city are valued, of course, by both locals and visitors. Locals and visitors are spending more and more time in each other's company. I often say they are eating and drinking together, together, they're partying together, they're sleeping together, in the sense that they're staying in Airbnb and things. There is more and more time being spent in each other's company, and while on the whole we tend to celebrate that as a really good thing, it's something that we need to be understanding of when it comes to local people. And it is also important to understand that in the city in general, this is a very rich, successful city. It's a city of success stories, but it does have its challenges as well. And ultimately, when it comes to political decision-making, it is something that we have to bear in mind. There is also this brilliant campaign that's being run by Marketing Edinburgh, looking at the type of city that people want to see in the future. I hope you've seen it already, because one of the aims of the campaign is that it will touch every resident at least once. Somebody will see this somewhere. And it's an ongoing campaign and a way of understanding what people feel about it. Other successful campaigns have been working elsewhere in Europe, and the results are coming out gradually over time. And I think it will be very important to take into account what is said here when we're looking at the strategy in the future. So to close then, and I told you about some of the provocative questions and some of the hard realities that we need to consider, but I'd like to invite you to think about some of these. To think about what was said at the most recent European Cities Marketing Conference was, don't ask what your city can do for more tourists, ask what tourism can do for your city. Are we really responding to some of the big issues that the city has? Now, we can't solve everything, that's absolutely certain, but we need to start thinking about what we can bring to the table and how we can help with the city. The city economic plan, I understand if not everybody's got it on their bedside table and reads it religiously. However, there are very important chapters there talking about inclusion and good growth. And it is important that the tourism industry asks this question. So how can the tourism industry support the economic goals? Not how can the economic plan support the tourism industry, which is an important question too, but we kind of need to turn it around, and perhaps I would say that this is a responsible position and something which perhaps we show we're ready to face the future by asking some of these questions. There's also this one. What does good growth look like? We see this a lot. And it is, the city's growing, demand is growing, the number of visitors is growing, but what does good growth look like? Because this is a question which cities across around the world, when we look at urbanization and tourism, is something everybody's grappling with. And I think we have to be able to answer this question locally in Edinburgh in a sensible way. So, as I said, this is the start of the process. Phase 2 will be starting in March. And to keep up to date about it, just follow ETAG and you'll find out more. And of course, I'm sure you're receiving more information as a result of having come to this conference as well. So there's an opportunity there to get involved. Everybody's invited. So on that note, do we have time for a couple of questions as well?
A couple of things just to say that it's important to say that this strategy will be balanced between 3 different areas: the residents, the businesses, and our visitors. Sure, on behalf of us all, we'd like to thank Peter for coming along today. Peter's work on phase 1 is going to be a central plank of what we're doing going forward. On the basis of ETAG's desire to appoint companies with quite quirky names, we've moved on from Topofave, which I can't obviously say very well, and we've appointed Melanie Sensical Consultants to do phase 2 of that. Melanie, I understand, is around today, and you guys will be contacted over the next few months to take phase 2 of that work forward. So in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Roddy, who may moderate a couple of questions.
Great, thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
We are running short of time, and I'm very conscious you're all looking at your watches and wanting a cup of coffee. So Kim, the questions that have come in, please. I think we'll ask you both the middle one. What do you feel is the biggest challenge for Edinburgh tourism to address in the 2030 strategy? One answer quite quickly.
I think locally we need to win the minds and hearts of the people in the city, and I think once we do that, we can really stride forward.
Peter?
Well, I'll put my 2 cents in. I think it's exactly managing increased demand from residents and from international visitors at a time clearly of public spending cuts. And so it's filling that gap and working out as an industry. It's partly how the industry answers that question is going to be a major challenge as well.
Okay, thank you. A couple of key things just to finish up with. The research document that Peter's done will be on the ETAG website soon, so please keep an eye on all the comms coming out so you can read the report in detail. And as everyone said, the next stage of the consultation now starts. As Nick said, it's your strategy, it's not ETAG's, it's your strategy to input. Please take the time when the comms come out to engage with Melanie, come to the consultation sessions and have an input in the future of the strategy.